Thank you for the opportunity to present our view on the industry's view on old patients. I'm very conscious of the fact that I'm between you and the coffee, so I'll be as quick as possible. And as the prior presenters have already dealt with a number of things that I wanted to present, it's going to be that much shorter. Other old patients, that is subject age 80 and above, are generally excluded from pre-authorization clinical trials, as we've seen this morning, from which they might potentially benefit. And the cause of this mainly is frailty, and the resulting lack of knowledge of the effects of drugs in this population leads to a self-fulfilling prophecy, that is, adverse events are more often observed in this population because they are nonetheless prescribed drugs in real life. I'm not going to go into the definition of frailty again because you've seen that earlier, just to say that I concur with the definitions that have been given. Just wanted to give a size of, a monetary size of the yearly cost of sarcopenia, for instance, which is one of the components of physical frailty, as we've seen, which is about the same as the cost of osteoporotic fractures. And if you consider that the old elderly are going to sustain both falls and fracture because of sarcopenia, you may see what the ultimate cost is. The prevalence in Europe from the SHARE study is for frailty to be 4.1% for people aged 50 to 64, and to increase up to 17% in population of plus 65. The good news is that it is a potentially reversible condition, provided we get there on time and do what needs to be done to recover, because the chances actually of complete recovery decline with age. You've seen this already. I'm not going to belabor this model described by Fried, just to say that, of course, patients with frailty have various levels of different physical decline. And probably the best approach to this condition is to use interventions that are going to be occurring at different levels, so that we are going to be more effective than just one intervention alone. So you want to decrease the chronic undernutrition and ensuring that people are well nourished, as well as physical activity sarcopenia, and, for example, diminish the balance problem. So the idea is also that we might not come with only one intervention, but an integrated intervention, which also poses developmental and regulatory questions. So although the EFPIA survey didn't have specific questions related to the very old or the very elderly, there were comments that were made during the survey that hinted in that direction, specifically that the guidance with regard to very elderly would be helpful, with the recognition that this was a significant issue to deal with. That, of course, there were questions around methodologies, as we've seen in the previous talks, and I think we're happy to see that there are definitions and there are methods, at least, that we can start to explore. Especially those contributing to the overall function of the patient, because the other issue is to, on top of the development of drugs for conditions that we know that are well described in the International Classification of Disease, we also need to look into the direction of functionalities, obviously, at the same time. A specific question was around the manifestation of adverse events in this population, which actually is likely to show different phenotypes of adverse events from the younger population because of their limited and diminished range of response to the stresses potentially brought about by the drugs. Of course, there is a need for a well-accepted operational definition of frailty, and we've just seen that we are getting there. And that frailty shouldn't be confused with calendar age or with disability. We've seen this. And also, if we look at the Rockwood definition related to the accumulation of disabilities, we see that, of course, it starts reasonably at younger age, actually. The index that is described never starts from zero. There is a significant level of disability, which increases, obviously, exponentially after 75 years. So the conclusion of this first part is that we need to include older patients in the pre-authorization clinical trials and to take into account their specific characteristics by systematically evaluating their frailty status, as with the tools that we've just seen, to be able to stratify them in the study, by identifying the multimorbidity clusters, and I think that the approach that just been presented is a very good method to explore as well, to try to diminish the variability within the population that we observe, and look at the geriatric syndromes systematically in the evaluation of safety of the drugs to not lose the rare events or the strange events that wouldn't be ascribed to our drug necessarily. Again, as I said, the categorical classification of disease is no longer sufficient. We need to look at the international classification of function as well. And maybe the pivot of the interaction between those two classification is the evaluation of function and frailty and the clusters. And of course, we need adequate regulatory appraisal and guidance necessary to help the industry in developing innovative programs around the older old. Just to give you an example of what this reflection around aging has brought about in the industry, and I'll give the example of our industry, where actually in order to tackle the specific old population, we've created a specific aging therapeutic strategic unit, which is a group that's handling all the developments around aging. And from the discussion that we have had during the creation of this unit, we've come to realize that we needed to shift from the old paradigm of a product-centered innovation to the patient-centered innovation aimed at fulfilling the complex therapeutic needs of the geriatric population, to deal with the specific geriatric medical conditions, and to slow down or prevent chronic disease complications to avoid the loss of autonomy as long as possible. In practical terms, that means that first we need to understand the unmet needs of the aging population, and especially the old population, which is not very well known at the time. We need to ensure that whatever we look for in the preclinical models, in the animal models that we use, they are translatable into meaningful measures and outcomes in the clinical studies, so that we are not developing drugs that for which we won't be able to measure the effect in the clinical studies. And of course, this implies innovation not only at the time of drug discovery, but also, as we've seen in this session, in terms of the clinical methodology to evidence the effectiveness and the efficacy of those and safety of those drugs in the population that we target. So in the next future, what we want to do, and it started with the temporary working group of the EFPIA, is to recommend the establishment of a collaborative regulatory think tank to establish a consensus on the methodologies that we have described here, and of course to firm up the operational definition and the endorsement of good geriatric functional outcomes. And I'll stop here and take your question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Philippe. Any question to Philippe or maybe to the other colleagues who presented before, since we have several minutes before the coffee. Any question? Yes, Francesca?
Yes, just in practical terms of involvement of frailer patients in clinical trials, I would like to ask through all three of the speakers whether they have any ideas of or experience of what is needed or what has worked or not worked in case we were thinking of having these patients involved more in depth in the trials.
Yes, Dr. Evans?
There are places where you can go, long-term care facilities. Clearly, you can go to get frail patients. And in many long-term care facilities, they have very different levels of care. So you can find patients in level 1 level of care that are fairly independent and are there for maybe other reasons besides having cognitive impairment. So, you know, many of the studies that we did were in long-term care facilities, and you can go to congregate housing facilities of the elderly. So there are lots of places, and there are, you know, geriatric outpatient clinics throughout the world. I know that they're growing in popularity in the United States, and I think there are some in Europe, but I think it has to be very geriatric very geriatric centric. But for the very old, I think that long-term care facilities are probably the best place to go.
Any other question or comment? Yes?
I'm behind the pillar here.
Sure.
Well, you will hear me anyway. Frédéric Lusala from Voisin Consulting. I heard the word consensus. It seems that everyone's working on these novel endpoints. Would it make any sense to seek a qualification opinion from the EMA, since you have now this framework that allows for some kind of a consensus if the method is recognized and demonstrated as appropriate?
I think that's a great idea.
That would certainly be a good idea. We should be more than willing to accept this type of question at the Scientific Advice Working Party, for sure, as was previously mentioned this morning. Any other question? Yes?
Just to remind that according to what Dr. Evans said, we are establishing with the Italian regulatory agency, the AIFA, this network of nursing homes to monitor the daily drug use, the adverse drug reactions, and eventually the outcomes. If anybody is interested, we use a comprehensive and standardized assessment instrument.